My name is Claire Whitman. I was tying the back of my wedding dress when my sister's name lit up on my phone. One message. 6 words. Don't expect anyone to show. I stared at it thinking it was a mistake. A cruel joke. But when I opened TikTok, I saw the truth. A slow-motion video of my entire family barefoot on a beach in Hawaii. My mom twirling with a mimosa. My dad holding a sign that read, "Ohana Forever." And Tessa in white spinning where I should have stood. Her caption family means showing up for the right people. My knees buckled, it was my wedding day. And they didn't even say my name. When I was 7, I memorized the layout of every hotel suite in the Whitman Grand by tracing my fingers over the blueprints my dad kept rolled up in his office. While Tessa played dress-up in Mom's walk-in closet, I sat under Dad's desk with a flashlight and a ruler dreaming up ways to make the guest experience smoother, faster, quieter. I didn't care about the marble tiles or the imported linens. I cared about systems, about how things worked underneath the surface. But in the Whitman family, no one noticed the gears. They only saw the shine. We grew up in a limestone mansion in Winnetka, north of Chicago. Everything was polished, floors, smiles, the silverware that never got used except when guests came over. Mom curated us like she curated the sitting room, always photo-ready. Tessa had the main display spot. Her golden curls, her giggle that could melt any investor, her instinct to pose even before the cameras clicked. By the time she was 16, she had her own social media manager and a part-time glam squad. Dad called her his little sunshine. He called me his lieutenant. The dynamic never changed even as we got older. I went to Harvard, double majored in economics and operations management. Tessa went viral on TikTok for dancing in a towel at one of our spas. At my graduation, Dad shook my hand like I was an intern he appreciated. At hers, well, they flew in a live string quartet and had her initials projected in fireworks across Lake Michigan. Still, I worked. I kept my head down. After college, I joined the corporate side of Whitman Hospitality Group, shadowing every department from housekeeping to finance. I got to know the chain from the boiler room up. I was the one they called when a location in Miami had a mold problem or when a celebrity trashed a penthouse in Aspen. I was a fixer. A ghost. I didn't mind, except I did. Quietly. The boardroom was where the pattern played out loudest. I'd spend nights preparing decks, reworking cost per guest models, exploring energy-saving retrofits. Then at the quarterly meeting, Tessa would show up in a blazer she couldn't pronounce, skim the slides, then say, "Wait, I have an idea." She'd repeat my plan, swap out a few verbs, and suddenly it was genius. Mom would clap softly. Dad would nod. The board would murmur in approval. No one looked at me. I began keeping a folder on my desktop called Theft Log. Just bullet points of who said what when. It wasn't meant to be vengeful, it was just reality. I needed a record, something to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. I never confronted Tessa about it. If I did, she'd probably cry, say she didn't mean to, that we were sisters, that ideas should be shared. And then she'd go live on TikTok with a story about how much she adored me, her brilliant big sister. And people would flood the comments with heart emojis and call me lucky. I wasn't jealous. That's the part no one understood. I didn't want the spotlight, I didn't want the interviews or the brand deals. I wanted a seat at the table that didn't feel like a folding chair. I wanted credit. Not applause, just acknowledgement. Just once I wanted to hear my dad say, "That was Claire's solution." Or my mom to say, "Your sister worked hard on that." But instead, it was always, "You know how Tessa is. Let her have this one." Or, "You're the strong one, Claire. You don't need the praise." One morning, a new hire in PR asked if I was Tessa's assistant. We were in the elevator at headquarters. I was holding a tablet and a coffee. Tessa was scrolling through her phone, humming. The girl said it casually like it made sense. I didn't correct her. Back at my office, I sat down at my desk, looked around at the walls filled with spreadsheets and emergency response flowcharts, and felt something sharp behind my ribs. Not pain exactly, more like awareness. I was never going to be seen the way I wanted to be. Not by them. That weekend at Sunday brunch, which was mandatory in our family unless you were hospitalized or dead, Mom passed around a mock-up of Tessa's new fragrance launch. The label had gold foil and a blurred photo of Tessa laughing on a balcony. Dad said it captured the brand's spirit. Mom said it was fresh, aspirational, and millennial-proof. I asked what the budget was. Tessa rolled her eyes and said, "Claire, don't ruin the vibe." No one else spoke. I folded my napkin and excused myself early. As I walked past the foyer, I heard Mom whisper, "She's so intense. Maybe she needs a vacation." Tessa giggled, a soft floating sound like bubbles in champagne. I didn't need a vacation. I needed a family that didn't treat me like the operations department of their lives, necessary, invisible, and expected to never break down. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I met Eric Dawson on a construction site that smelled like sawdust and ambition. I was leading the project management team for a historical hotel restoration downtown Denver, and he was the lead structural engineer from Cincinnati, flown in after the previous contractor made a mess of the foundation. He walked in wearing steel-toe boots and a wrinkled blue button-down, holding a tablet like it was an extension of his hand. No swagger, no performance. Just calm competence. It was supposed to be a 10-minute meeting. It turned into an hour of debating load-bearing walls and seismic retrofitting. I respected him before I even realized I liked him. He didn't care that I was a Whitman. He didn't try to impress me. When I told him I disagreed with his calculations, he smiled and said, "Then let's run it again." No ego. Just numbers. We started grabbing coffee during lunch breaks, then dinners after long workdays. By the time the hotel was sealed up and the floors polished, we'd fallen into something steady, quiet, and real. The kind of love that didn't shout. It just showed up every day. He wasn't from a family like mine. His parents were high school teachers in Blue Ash, Ohio. He was an only child. No drama, no family business. Just hand-packed lunches and homegrown tomatoes on the weekends. When I visited his parents' house, his mom made us lasagna and his dad asked about my favorite book. Nobody brought up shares or endowments or which boarding school I'd gone to. They just saw me. I didn't tell my family about Eric for months. Partly because I knew how it would go. Mostly because I didn't want to taint something good by handing it over to people who couldn't see past the surface, but eventually I caved. It was Thanksgiving, and my mother asked if I was still dating that orthopedic surgeon from Palo Alto. I said no, I was seeing someone new. A structural engineer. His name was Eric. She blinked twice and sipped her wine. How quaint. My father gave a polite nod. Civil engineering is important. Infrastructure is the backbone of society. Tessa, however, grinned. A real-life Bob the Builder. Is he good with Legos too? I ignored her. Eric had already met worse on job sites. When I brought him home for Christmas, it was a controlled disaster. My mother greeted him like he was the intern who forgot her coffee order. Tessa gave him a once-over, then whispered to me while we were in the kitchen prepping crudités. "He's cute, Claire, but aren't you afraid he's a bit bland?" I smiled through my teeth. "No, I find stability attractive. Maybe try it sometime." She laughed like I'd just told her a knock-knock joke. Then she sauntered out with the olives like she owned the place. Eric didn't complain, he never does. But later that night he leaned over while we were brushing our teeth in my old room and said, "Your family's kind of intense." I spat toothpaste into the sink and replied, "You have no idea." The cocktail party came a few days later, an annual thing my parents hosted to remind their social circle that they were still elite. I warned Eric it would be uncomfortable, but he insisted on coming. Said if he was going to be in my life, he needed to see all of it. Even the sharp-edged parts. He wore his one tailored suit, the navy one from his cousin's wedding, and brought a bottle of Syrah he'd picked up from a local vineyard near his parents' place. My mother handed it off to the caterer without a word. Tessa wore a backless black dress and diamonds that weren't hers. Somewhere between the shrimp tower and the piano solo, Tessa made her move. She was talking to a group of my parents' friends near the fireplace, swirling her wine like a prop. "Claire's boyfriend is lovely, isn't he? I just hope he doesn't mind being outnumbered in a family of overachievers. You know how engineers are. Brilliant with buildings, terrible with communication. That's why most of them get dumped midway through renovations." She laughed lightly and looked right at me. I said nothing. Eric didn't hear her, but I did. The next morning, I found his phone on the nightstand while he was making us coffee. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. But a notification had popped up. From Tessa. I opened the thread. Months back. A series of flirty texts. "Hey stranger, how's Denver treating you? Miss seeing that serious face. We should grab a drink, just us." Eric hadn't responded. Not once. But he had taken screenshots. The album was labeled "In case she escalates." I sat on the edge of the bed stunned. He came in with 2 mugs, paused when he saw my face. "She messaged you," I said. He set the mugs down, knelt in front of me. "I didn't want to tell you. I figured if I ignored it, she'd stop. I didn't want to hurt you." I nodded. I believed him. But I didn't delete the screenshots. I never told Tessa I knew. Maybe I should have. But some truths are sharper when left unsaid. And some betrayals are louder in silence. I started seeing her differently after that. The way she smiled too brightly at Eric, how she asked just a few too many questions about our future, if we'd set a date yet, where we'd live, if he'd still work those dusty little sites. The wedding plans started quietly. Eric proposed one evening while we were hiking outside Boulder. No flash, no audience. Just us, a view, and a simple ring he'd picked himself. I said yes without hesitation. We didn't rush into telling the family. I wanted a moment that was just ours. But in Ridgefield, nothing stays quiet for long. And once Tessa found out, the game changed. She stopped answering my calls for 2 days after that boardroom ambush. But I knew Tessa too well to believe she'd gone quiet out of shame. No, she was recalculating. And I didn't have to wait long to see the first ripple. A new marketing announcement landed in my inbox that Friday. Tessa had signed an exclusive beauty brand partnership and would be flying out for a campaign shoot in Maui just weeks before my wedding. The shoot dates suspiciously aligned with my wedding weekend. The subject line read, "So ready for the big escape." It was subtle enough to pass off as coincidental. But to me, it wasn't just a brand campaign, it was a warning shot. Still, I wasn't ready to believe the worst. Not yet. I sent out the formal invitations for the wedding, each hand addressed in navy calligraphy embossed with our names, Claire Prescott and Ethan Rowe. I even included a personalized note in the ones for my family. For my parents, I wrote, "I know we've had distance, but this day means everything to me. I would love for you to be there." For Tessa, I wrote, "You'll always be my sister. No matter what has happened, I still want you beside me." And for Aunt Margot, my mother's sister and my childhood confidant, I said, "You once told me not all bridges burn. I'm hoping ours hasn't." I mailed the stack myself and watched the clerk stamp each envelope. It felt ceremonial. A desperate act of faith, really. The following week, I arranged a private tasting at the restaurant that would host our rehearsal dinner. It was a cozy vineyard property just outside Napa, a place Ethan and I had discovered during a rainy weekend getaway. I invited my parents, Tessa and Aunt Margot, to join Ethan and me for the chef's curated menu. Wine pairings, farm to table dishes, an entire evening designed to create a little pocket of joy before the whirlwind. Only Ethan and I showed up. My mother called 20 minutes after it started to say her doubles tennis partner had rolled an ankle and she needed to sub in. My father didn't bother calling. Tessa texted me a picture of her in hair and makeup with the caption, "Can't make it, glam calls." And Aunt Margot, ever the art lover, left a voice message that she was in Santa Fe touring a new installation. I picked at my salad while Ethan tried to fill the silence with stories from his client meeting. I smiled and nodded, pretending to listen, but inside my chest a dull ache bloomed. That night I cried in the car. Not loud, not messy. Just quiet tears that blurred the dashboard lights. I wasn't even sure if I was mourning their absence or mourning the girl who still hoped they'd show up. Back at home, I told myself they were just busy. That they'd come around when the day arrived. That maybe, just maybe, they were still figuring out how to support me without knowing how to say it. But then came the real gut punch. It started when one of my old college friends, Jenna, sent me a link. "Isn't this the boutique you mentioned for your final fitting?" she wrote. I clicked the link and stared. Tessa. Standing in the center of a whitewashed bridal showroom in Oahu. holding a beaded strapless gown up to her frame. Her head tilted, eyes closed, the faintest smirk on her lips. The caption, "So ready for the big escape. Can't wait for the most important weekend of my life." I read it 3 times. The most important weekend. She knew. She had to know. And still she was planning something for that exact time. I stared at my phone for so long the screen dimmed. Ethan came in with takeout and asked if I was okay. I told him I had a headache. I didn't tell him I felt like I was disappearing. In the days that followed, I tried to pull myself back together. Finalize the seating chart, approve the flower arrangements, finish my vows. But each task felt heavier than it should have. Like I was dragging my heart through wet cement. One evening, I caught myself scrolling through old photos. There was one of me and Tessa on her 8th birthday wearing matching pink dresses, faces sticky with cake. Another of us at a ski lodge in Vermont, huddled under one giant parka, laughing so hard we fell into the snow. There was even a video from her college graduation, me holding the camera yelling her name as she crossed the stage. I had always shown up. For every milestone. For every heartbreak. For every late-night panic call. And yet, as my own milestone neared, she wasn't just absent, she was actively redirecting the spotlight. I tried one last time. I called her. She answered finally, "Hey Claire." Bin slammed. "What's up?" I kept my voice calm. "Just wanted to ask. Are you coming to the wedding?" A pause. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the faint hum of a hotel air conditioner. "You know I'd love to, but I might be tied up with the Maui campaign. It's a big deal. First solo campaign. I thought you'd be happy for me." I let out a breath. "I am. I thought maybe you'd schedule around it." She laughed light and airy. "Claire, I can't plan my whole life around your wedding. I mean, you've had your moment. It's time for other people to shine too, right?" Something inside me fractured. She didn't say goodbye. Just ended the call with a casual "talk soon." I sat on the kitchen floor after that, legs folded, head against the cabinets. The only sound was the ticking clock above the fridge. I had wanted so badly to believe blood was enough. That history could carry us forward. But sometimes history is just another word for wait. That night I didn't cry. Instead, I lit a candle, opened my laptop, and pulled up the digital guest list. I deleted her name. Then my parents. Then Margot's. And I didn't feel guilty. Not even for a second. Amy noticed my silence before the stylist did. She gently set the blush brush down and came to my side, lowering her voice just above a whisper. "What is it, Claire?" I just handed her my phone. The screen was still lit. One line, "Don't expect anyone to show." No punctuation, no explanation, nothing to soften the blow. The sender was Tessa. No emoji, no heart, no sorry. Just those 7 words. Amy didn't speak right away. Her fingers hovered almost like she wanted to erase it, as if deleting it could make it untrue. And then she looked up at me. "You okay?" I didn't answer. My hands were trembling. Not with surprise, with clarity. It wasn't a last-minute emergency. No sudden illness, no flight delay. No unexpected work obligation. They weren't coming because they never planned to. I opened TikTok out of impulse. It was muscle memory by now. First video that loaded was a crisp, sunny beach. Ocean breeze blowing through palm trees. Then I saw her. Tessa in a long white maxi dress, barefoot, twirling slowly on sand like she was starring in a perfume ad. The camera panned out. Mom was holding a cocktail with a pineapple wedge. Dad was mid-toast, grinning like it was the 4th of July. Margot was in her signature floral sundress, clinking glasses with Uncle Reed. The caption at the bottom floated in pink cursive text. "Finally together. Family means showing up for the right people." Underneath was a location tag, Kailua Beach, Hawaii. Amy covered her mouth. Oh my God. I wasn't breathing. A notification popped up under the video. Comment from someone named Cassian13. "Wait, where's Claire?" Tessa replied within minutes. "Unavailable." That word felt more violent than any curse. Unavailable, like I was a missing sock or a cancelled appointment. Not a daughter, not a sister. Not a bride. Amy whispered something, but I couldn't make it out. Her voice came through a layer of static. The room around me spun gently like the rotating chair I was sitting in. It didn't stop. It just kept spinning. I stood up. "Claire, sit down," she said. "We can fix your hair in a minute." I couldn't sit. My legs carried me across the room to the suite's balcony. I opened the door, letting the cold San Francisco morning air slap my face. Below, the city was still waking up. Cabs honked. The fog was beginning to lift. But I couldn't see any of it clearly. Amy followed me out and wrapped a robe over my shoulders. "They didn't just not come," I said quietly. "They made a whole trip. Booked a retreat, posted it, celebrated it. She didn't try to justify it. That's what made her different. She didn't say maybe they didn't mean it like that. She didn't say maybe it's a mistake. She just stood beside me and said, 'I'm here.'" I looked at her. "You always are." She smiled without saying anything. Then she added, "Want me to go punch her through the phone?" I almost laughed. Almost. Back inside the stylist, Nadine stood awkwardly beside the vanity. Her eyes darted to the clock and back to me. "Do you still want to get ready?" I nodded. "Yes." "But are you sure?" I nodded again, stronger this time. "Yes." "Let's finish." It wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It wasn't about saving face or putting on a brave performance. It was about choosing to show up for myself. While they toasted in Hawaii, while they called it a family retreat, while they hashtagged their betrayal like it was a branding campaign, I was here. Still standing. The ceremony was in 3 hours. The florist had just delivered the arrangements. White orchids, calla lilies, dusty pink roses, all set in tall glass vases. The venue coordinator was checking in downstairs. Ethan's tux was already hanging in the closet across the suite. Everything was ready, except them. No family on the bride's side. No parents to walk me down the aisle. No sister to adjust my veil. Just a perfectly timed social media storm to let me know I was officially erased. Amy leaned over as I sat again. "Claire, if you want to cancel this whole thing, you know Ethan will understand." I turned and looked her straight in the eyes. I'm not giving them today. Because today wasn't about them. It wasn't even about forgiveness or revenge. It was about reclaiming something they never thought I deserved. Dignity. The stylist resumed her work. Hands gentle, respectful, no chatter. Just quiet focus. The makeup brush felt soft across my skin like clouds trying to hold together in a windstorm. I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired but clear. My lips were tight but unshaking. And in that moment, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not Claire the daughter. Not Claire the placeholder. Not Claire the backup plan. Me. Amy checked her phone. "Ethan says he'll be here in 20 minutes for the first look. Do you still want to do that?" "Yes." "You sure?" "More than ever." Amy left the room to give me space. I stood again, this time by the tall window. A new message buzzed in. From an unknown number. All it said was, "Thought you'd break." Guess not. No name, no context. But I knew it wasn't random. Tessa. The words weren't cruel, they were impressed, maybe even amused. But I didn't reply. Because I wasn't done. Not yet. The only message they deserved was silence. And that silence would echo louder than any toast, any beach twirl, any retreat hashtag pretending I never existed. I picked up my bouquet. The flowers felt heavier than expected, but I didn't mind. Let them watch from afar. Let them scroll. Let them wonder what kind of woman walks herself down the aisle and still shines brighter than any destination wedding. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The next part of this day belonged to me. I walked past the patio where the chairs were still scattered from earlier, through the stone archway leading to the ceremony garden. The air smelled of lavender and warm wood. I could hear soft murmurs ahead, guests settling into their seats. I stood just beyond the hedges, where no one could see me yet, smoothing the front of my dress with trembling fingers. Eric was already there, standing under the wisteria-covered arbor. He looked calm, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't look toward the path I'd be walking, didn't scan the crowd. He was just waiting. For me. Minutes earlier in the bridal suite, I told him what had happened. That my parents weren't coming. That they had chosen Amy's wedding over mine. That this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a message. He had asked me quietly, without judgment, without panic. "What do you want to do?" I had stared out the window at the lake, my chest tight. The easy answer would have been to cancel it all. To curl into the shame they had handed me and wear it like a veil. But the truth was, I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to let them steal this from me. Not this time. I wanted to walk down that aisle. Even if I had to do it alone. I turned to the coordinator, a young woman named Tara who had been nothing but kind all weekend, and whispered, "Start the music." As the first notes of the string quartet began to float through the air, I stepped forward. I could feel every head turn. The hush spread through the crowd like a ripple. I didn't look at anyone. My eyes were locked on Eric. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed a figure rise from the second row on the right. A man tall in a navy suit. He walked toward me slowly, but with purpose. At first, I didn't recognize him. Then I saw his face and my breath caught. It was Mr. Whitaker, Amy's father. The man who used to manage the boutique hotel where my dad once worked before the accident. He'd known me since I was a teenager, had always offered a kind word in passing. I had no idea he was even on the guest list. He stopped beside me and said softly, "May I?" I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He offered his arm. I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow and we continued walking. The moment didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like respect. When we reached the arbor, Mr. Whitaker handed me off to Eric with a slight smile. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze before returning to his seat. I watched him sit beside his wife, who gave me a small teary nod. I nodded back. The officiant welcomed everyone. I barely heard him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might shake the veil off my head. As we exchanged vows, I felt the weight of everything my parents had chosen to ignore. Every missed birthday call. Every time they praised Amy's smallest accomplishment while glazing over my years of work and healing. But I didn't let those thoughts steal this moment. Not this one. When it was time for me to speak, I took a breath, looked out at the faces in front of us, and said, "I want to thank those of you here today. Not because you're family by blood, but because you chose to show up. To stand by love. Thank you for not needing perfection to offer support. For choosing grace over gossip. You are the people I will remember from this day." I didn't say my parents' names. I didn't mention Amy. The applause was soft but genuine. A few people wiped their eyes. We were announced as husband and wife and kissed under the wisteria. After the ceremony, there was a small cocktail reception. I walked through the crowd holding a glass of Prosecco, receiving hugs from people I hadn't expected to show up. One of my college professors. A barista from my old neighborhood. Even the couple who had rented us the lake house for the weekend. Everyone seemed to sense the missing pieces, but no one asked. It was like a silent agreement that joy could exist without full explanation. Later that night in the suite where we were staying, I peeled off the lace dress and stood at the window staring at the moon's reflection on the lake. Eric sat on the edge of the bed, his tie undone, shoes kicked off. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't press. He just said, "Do you want to forget them, or do you want to respond?" I turned to him slowly. My voice was quiet but steady. "I won't forget, and yes, I'll respond. In my own way." He nodded like he knew what that meant without needing the details. We lay in bedbacks to the cool cotton sheets, the night air drifting in through the cracked window. I didn't sleep much. My mind was already turning over the next steps. Not revenge. Not chaos. Something better, something that left no room for denial or rewriting history. They had removed me from the picture. Now I would build one they couldn't crop. I opened my laptop with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No more spreadsheets late at night that no one saw. No more cleaning up Tessa's messes while she collected accolades on stages I built. I had nothing left to prove. But I had everything to reclaim. The internal systems still accepted my login. No one had revoked my credentials. Typical. They had the gall to steal my name off the charter, but no one bothered to check if I still had access to the financial backend. I navigated past the splash screen typed in my two-factor code, and within seconds I was staring at the beating heart of Brightcap's expense architecture. I didn't touch payroll. The employees deserved stability. I didn't touch vendor accounts or incoming invoices. But I did find the executive expenditure tabs, the ones labeled strategic operations and special outreach, the same ones Lorraine used for her designer luncheons and Tessa used to swipe the corporate card in Maui. With 2 clicks, I locked those budgets. Another click sent notifications to the finance team. No explanations. Just flags and freezes. The system would log the changes under my ID. Let them try to reverse it. They would have to explain why the woman they claimed was no longer relevant still had access, and why they had spent $83,000 at the Four Seasons in the last 3 quarters. Then I pulled up the legal documentation template. It took me exactly 8 minutes to draft and file my formal withdrawal from the charter. The irony of it hit me, they had already removed my name hoping I wouldn't notice. But the system still considered me a co-founder. So I gave them what they wanted: my official removal, but on record. Publicly filed. Legally traceable. No spin, no denial. Just a clean signature that would force them to acknowledge everything I had once meant to the company. I copied the legal department. I sent it to HR. Then I looped in the audit inbox. I didn't owe them discretion anymore. But that was only the start. I picked up my phone and called David Chen. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady as ever. "Claire," he said, "I saw your name come across my feed this week. You all right? I'm not calling as your family friend David. I need professional counsel." "You've got it," he said without hesitation. I laid it out: the removal from the company charter, the suspicious usage of executive funds, the attribution of my intellectual property to Tessa in several public campaigns. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "I'm no longer with the firm your mom used. I went independent 3 years ago, which means I don't owe her anything." "Good, because I'm not just asking for advice. I want you to represent me." There was a pause. "Then, it would be an honor." By the end of the day, I had David filing the paperwork that ensured every digital step I'd taken was logged and protected. He also drafted a cease and desist one. I wasn't planning to send yet, but I wanted it ready. I wasn't aiming to sue. Not yet. What I needed was an audit. That's where Margaret Vega came in. She was a name I remembered from my early days at Stanford, an analytical powerhouse known for forensic accounting work during the cryptocurrency collapse in 2019. She'd once dismantled a startup scam so surgically that the board had begged her to stay on as CFO. When I called her, I expected resistance. Instead, she asked one question: "What years do you want me to pull?" "Start with 2017, I told her. "Run through everything branded under Tessa's leadership. Any campaigns, partnerships, or IP filings. I want to know what had my fingerprints on it." Margaret didn't need a pep talk. She just said, "Consider it done," and hung up. With those pieces moving, I sat back and stared at the screen. For a moment, the silence pressed in. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner. The faint echo of laughter outside from tourists passing by. I thought about what Tessa had said the last time we shared a dinner table. "You've always been good at building, but I'm the one who knows how to make it sparkle." She wasn't entirely wrong. I had built the bones. She polished them for Instagram. But when the bones were stolen and the sparkle dimmed, what did she have left? That was what the audit would reveal. The hollow inside the glitter. I made myself a cup of coffee even though it was well past sunset. The sky outside my Airbnb was deep lavender stretching over the Kona coastline. I'd picked the place for its quiet. No distractions, just enough signal to work. No trace of bright cap decor, no family portraits, just blank white walls and a deck overlooking the waves. As I sat on the deck watching the horizon, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You made your point, can we talk?" No name. But I knew who it was. Tessa. I locked my phone without replying. Not yet. Let the silence speak. Inside, my laptop pinged with a new email. Subject: preliminary findings. It was from Margaret. And what I read in that first line made me sit up straight. Claire, you were listed as strategic advisor only in the quarterly report of 2021, but the campaign documents include notes in your handwriting and internal timestamps from your login. I believe there's a pattern here. Let me dig further. I closed the screen slowly. They wanted a version of me they could erase, but instead I'd become the part of the picture they couldn't delete without unraveling the entire frame. I woke up to the sound of glass clinking against tile. At first, I thought it was a housekeeper. But when I sat up still in the robe from the spa the night before, I saw Tessa on the balcony with a mimosa in one hand and her phone in the other, lip-syncing to some trending audio. She paced barefoot, draped in a silk cover-up she probably borrowed without asking, facing the sunrise like it owed her a backdrop. Then I heard it. Her voice louder this time, not lip-syncing. She looked into the camera and said with a pout, "When your family freezes your accounts mid-vacation and you still slay." She spun dramatically, then tossed her mimosa into the grass below, like she was the lead in a music video. I rubbed my temples. No mention of me, no context, just Tessa performing victimhood again. The Whitman way. An hour later, the phone calls started. First from the hotel desk. Then from the restaurant. Then the spa. All our charges had been declined. Apparently Lorraine had put a freeze on the family accounts we were using. I suspected it wasn't just pettiness. More likely they were panicking over PR or legal concerns. Tessa came storming into the suite while I was brushing my teeth, waving her phone. "They locked me out of my own card," she yelled, then added, "And guess what? That stupid TikTok is already at 70,000 views. I'm being punished for being honest." I stared at her through the mirror. "Honest? You think that was honesty?" She scoffed and walked away, mumbling something about how I wouldn't understand what it meant to have followers. But I wasn't thinking about her follower count. I was thinking about what the comments might say once someone pieced together the date. It didn't take long. By afternoon, someone had reposted her TikTok on Reddit under the title, "Wait, isn't this her sister's wedding day?" The comments were brutal. People started asking questions. A few tagged the Whitman Foundation. A few dug up an old interview where Lorraine had claimed the family thrived on unity. Another person found a behind-the-scenes clip from the wedding welcome party where Tessa had drunkenly giggled and said into her wine glass, "She won't say anything. She never does." That clip went viral. Over 4 million views in under 24 hours. And just like that, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just about a family drama anymore. It became a case study. I didn't ask for the attention. I didn't even speak. But suddenly I was a stand-in for every woman who'd ever been erased, talked over, written out of her own story. An editor named Samantha Blake from Lux Americana DM'd me that night. She wanted to feature me in a piece about familial ghosting and the psychology of erasure. She said, "You don't have to give a tell-all. Just let people see the face behind the silence." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to control the narrative before it spiraled further. But the bigger part of me, the one that had learned restraint not as a virtue but a survival tactic, said no. I didn't reply. That restraint didn't matter to Tessa. By morning, someone in her social media team had posted a clip meant to show her human side. But instead it captured her in full costume, adjusting her hair and muttering to someone off-screen. "Let them talk. She'll fold like she always does. She's spineless." The clip was yanked within minutes. But not fast enough. The internet has a memory now. A cruel, eternal one. Even Tessa's followers turned on her. And then came the journalists. One by one the calls poured in. But it was an email from a small branding watchdog blog that made me freeze. Subject line: unauthorized image use in Whitman campaign. The attached screenshot showed a promotional ad from the previous fall. A close-up of my face, eyes blurred slightly for effect, with the tagline, "The soul of Whitman." Bold serif font, luxury filter, shared across billboards, Instagram stories, print ads. I'd never consented to any of it. The photo was from a retreat 2 years ago, before things started unraveling. Tessa had been the one holding the camera. I didn't even remember posing, but there it was. My image. My words. My name hidden in metadata. Used to sell a lifestyle that no longer included me. I felt my pulse throb in my ears. I opened my laptop. Somewhere between the shock and the sting I found clarity. I gathered screenshots, pulled old email threads, found timestamps. I called Angela, my attorney in Seattle. A woman who didn't flinch at powerful names or large families. I told her everything. She listened. Quietly. Thoroughly. Then she said, "Claire, this isn't just image use. This is commercial appropriation. Identity theft, maybe. You have grounds to pursue them." I wasn't interested in vengeance, but I was done being the ghost in someone else's empire. Angela requested every file I had. I sent them that night. By the time the sun rose over our last day in Hawaii, the Whitman sisters weren't trending for luxury. They were trending for liability. And somewhere in the middle of all the noise, I sat on the edge of the balcony, legs curled beneath me, phone turned off, letting the silence finally belong to me. Margaret was quiet as she clicked through the spreadsheets, her eyes scanning every line like she was trying to decipher a code only she could read. The breeze from the open window rustled the pages of her notebook, but she didn't move. Her focus was absolute. I stood behind her with my arms crossed, watching as my old mentor pieced together the fragments of my erased career. She turned slowly toward me and tapped the screen. "This campaign here. Operation Palm Bloom. You built this." I nodded. I remembered every detail. I remembered the sleepless nights, the pitch deck revisions, the heated calls with the design team in Spain. I remembered presenting it to the board in Miami, how it had taken 3 quarters to see results, and how we'd raised occupancy rates by 28% over the previous year. Margaret's voice lowered. "Claire, this report lists Tessa as the sole lead." My throat tightened. I leaned in. There it was. My campaign, my numbers, my clients, my sleepless months, and next to the header in black Arial font, Project Lead Tessa Whitman. That was the first of 12. We spent the rest of the afternoon going line by line, verifying each one. Each campaign, each client initiative, each internal system overhaul, all had been scrubbed of my name in board reports. But I had the originals. The proposals. The timestamps. The emails. And the memory of the day Tessa had borrowed my laptop to show Mom something before the presentation. Margaret reached for her phone and called David. She didn't ask me if I was ready. She knew. I was already past ready. David's voice was brisk as he picked up. Margaret filled him in, her tone clipped and professional. Then she handed the phone to me. "Are you ready for this to get ugly?" he asked. I didn't flinch. "I'm not here for a beauty contest." He chuckled once. "Good. I'll file for a formal record verification and initiate a preliminary damages claim. We'll start with the Miami campaign, then build out from there. You have the emails, all of them. Plus slide decks. Drafts. Meeting recordings. Perfect. I'll have my team pull the original board reports and we'll compare. Expect a statement draft in your inbox by morning." After we hung up, I stared at my laptop. 12 stolen projects. 12 deliberate removals. Not errors. Not oversights. Systematic erasure. And now finally, it wasn't just me who saw it. The next day, Margaret showed me an early article that had popped up on a business blog. It was titled "Sisters in Sync" or "One Side Aligned." A familiar photo filled the header, Tessa and me at a fundraising gala from 3 years ago. The caption now read, "Whitman Sisters, the dual minds behind Erasure's pivot." Except only one of us had been holding a mic that night. Only one of us had outlined the pivot in that speech. Only one of us had ever believed the credit was shared. That article was the match. Others followed like a trail of dry leaves. Who really rescued Erasure's numbers in 2021 inside the silent departure of Claire Whitman? From partnership to plagiarism. Margaret skimmed the headlines and turned to me with a look I couldn't quite name. "They're going to ask for interviews," she said. "You don't have to answer, but if you want the truth out there." I nodded slowly. "Let them come." Tessa tried to do damage control. Her assistant emailed me twice in the span of 1 hour asking for a clarifying quote for an article already in progress. Then came the PR rep. Then came my mother. Lorraine called from the company line. She didn't even pretend to make small talk. Claire, I think we need to discuss the tone of these stories. You're making your sister look like a thief. I blinked slowly, trying to keep my voice level. I'm not making her look like anything. I'm just finally not hiding the truth. Your name was never removed with malice, she insisted. These were collective efforts. The board chose to highlight Tessa's visibility. It's marketing, not sabotage. Then tell the board to undo the marketing, I replied. Or better yet, tell them to print the original credits and apologize. She sighed. This is not the way we handle things in the family. I let that sit for a beat. You're right. You handled it by erasing me. I'm handling it by showing my work. She hung up. By the end of the week, David had filed for formal acknowledgement of intellectual contribution across 4 years of operations. A second notice was sent requesting internal audits of all board communications where my name was omitted. He was preparing a civil suit for damages to professional reputation and loss of future earnings. The corporate Slack channels lit up. I wasn't there anymore, but people forwarded me screenshots. Threads about revisions to contribution logs, nervous questions about compliance, DMs about who had access to what files and when. Even people who had stayed silent before were suddenly uneasy. They weren't sure which way the wind was blowing, and they were starting to sense the storm. I didn't give interviews. But Margaret arranged a controlled Q&A with one trusted journalist, an alum from her early career days who ran a business accountability column. We met in a quiet cafe tucked off a side street in Venice. I wore no makeup, just a navy blouse and my grandmother's silver locket. The journalist asked simple questions. Not scandal bait. Just when did you notice the credits vanishing? How did it feel? Why did you leave? I answered each with measured clarity. I told the truth. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't call names. I just said what happened. And when the piece went live, it wasn't viral in a flashy, scandalous way. It was steady. Quiet. Like a slow-moving tide that keeps rising even when you don't see it. I walked the beach that evening with Margaret. She said nothing for a long time. Then, as we stood at the edge of the sand, she handed me a copy of the article printed out. You took back your name, she said. I looked at the ocean. Then I looked at her. Not all of it yet. But it's a start. They showed up just after 6. I knew they would eventually. I had left a trail of truths too bold to ignore, and people like them don't tolerate loose ends, especially not ones that can talk. I heard the knock before I saw them, but I already knew who it was. The rhythm was too sharp, too impatient. I didn't answer right away. I took a slow breath, finished my tea, and calmly walked to the door. When I opened it, Charles Prescott was already fuming. His face was flushed, collar slightly undone, like he had stormed here from a boardroom fight he'd just lost. Lorraine was behind him in a pristine beige trench coat, lips tight, eyes scanning my apartment as if expecting to find hidden cameras. And Tessa, arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe like she belonged here. Claire, Charles barked, his voice too loud for the hallway, you think. Brightcap is some kind of toy you can toss around whenever you want. Do you even understand what you've done? I didn't flinch. I stepped back slightly, letting them in. If they wanted a confrontation, I preferred it on my own turf. The living room was clean and quiet. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock above the kitchen counter. Lorraine looked around as if disgusted by how normal my life seemed. You could have waited, she said coolly, her voice laced with restraint. This chaos, you've stirred up the headlines, the investors panicking, all of it. You could have let things settle. But no, you had to make a spectacle. Make your own family a national joke. Tessa dropped onto my couch like she owned it. Still with that smug, superior air she wore better than perfume. So this is where you've been nesting. She glanced at me. Let me guess. All this for Ethan? I raised an eyebrow. For Ethan, you think this is about a man? Isn't it always? She replied, tossing her hair. You ditched your family for some second-rate lawyer with a chip on his shoulder. I laughed just once. The kind of laugh that comes when you're too tired to be angry. I walked over to the table and picked up the folder I had prepared that morning. Actually, 3 of them. I handed the first to Charles. Inside were copies of internal memos, contracts, and email threads. They outlined line by line the contributions I had made to Brightcap, the partnerships I had secured, the patents filed under my leadership, the valuation growth that had tracked with every decision I made. Highlighted in yellow were all the instances where my name had been erased and replaced. He flipped through it, eyes narrowing. I handed the second to Lorraine. Legal documents detailing the unauthorized use of my image, likeness, and personal story in Brightcap's rebranding. Trademark violations. Licensing infractions. PR materials that used my face, my words, my pitch without permission. I watched her lips tighten as she read. The third went to Tessa. Bank statements, internal accounting logs, and marked-up spreadsheets. Each page circled in red where expenditures had been funneled into her private accounts under consulting fees or executive wellness stipends. I included the spreadsheet Ethan had built, the one that showed the missing $250,000 used for the Hamptons property she thought no one knew about. Tessa flipped to the second page and froze. "You think this makes you a hero?" she said, her voice suddenly brittle. "Running to the press like some whistleblower." "I didn't run," I replied. "I walked. Out of your shadow, out of your lies, and straight into my name. I didn't betray anyone. I just stopped protecting you from yourselves." Charles slammed the first folder shut. "This is slander. You think these papers are enough to win anything in court?" "No," I said quietly. "But they're enough to start the questions. Enough to make every investor and partner wonder who's been hiding what. And I've got more. Ethan made sure of that." He sneered. "We'll sue you for breach of fiduciary duty." "Try me," I said, stepping closer. "You think I haven't documented every instance of misconduct since you pushed me out? You want this to go public. You want depositions. You want subpoenas. I'm not afraid of discovery, Charles." "Are you silence? Thick electric." Lorraine stood slowly, folding the folder closed with practiced grace. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something crack beneath the surface. Not regret, not guilt, just fear. The quiet, creeping kind that only shows when control is slipping through your fingers. "This isn't how family treats each other," she murmured. I tilted my head. But it's exactly how you treated me. I'm just responding in your language now." Tessa rose from the couch, dropping the folder like it burned her hands. "We're not done." "Actually, we are," I said. I walked to the door and opened it. "You came to my home to intimidate me. You failed. Take your folders, or don't. Either way, they're already backed up in 5 places, and one of them is a lawyer's office on retainer." They didn't move at first. Then Charles brushed past me, muttering something under his breath. Lorraine followed, one hand on her pearls. Tessa lingered a second longer, glaring like a child denied candy. "You're going to regret this," she said. I smiled. "Maybe. But not today." When the door shut behind them, I leaned back against it and let the silence settle. My heart was racing, but not from fear. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like something they couldn't define anymore. Something they couldn't erase. And I had just drawn the line in permanent ink. They didn't call, not after the speech, not after the headlines, not even when the lawyers got involved. David moved quickly. By the following morning, a formal letter had been sent to the executive board of Whitman Grand Resorts, notifying them of my complete withdrawal. It was short, cold, and legally airtight. He also filed a cease and desist order demanding they stop using my name, likeness, or any intellectual property associated with my designs and marketing contributions. Enclosed was a 30-page dossier of dated memos, email threads, campaign blueprints, and original designs, all with my name on them. I didn't even have to look at it. I remembered every piece. Every all-nighter, every scribble in the margins of hotel brochures. I used to think the work would speak for itself, but now I knew better. The work needed a voice, and that voice had finally spoken. David copied me on the email. I saw the signature block, Whitman Grand Resorts Executive Legal Department, and for the first time it felt like just another corporation. Not a family. Not mine. 2 days later, the press release arrived. Whitman Grand Resorts acknowledges an oversight in the attribution of contributions by Miss Claire Whitman in the development of various campaigns between 2014 and 2020. We regret any confusion caused and will take steps to update our internal records accordingly. No apology. Just legalese soaked in passive voice. It was like reading a hotel room service menu, formal, bland, and entirely devoid of accountability. David asked if I wanted to respond publicly. I said no, I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say on that microphone. The world could do what it wanted with the rest. By Friday, Eric and I had packed up what little we still had in Chicago and hit the road. No press, no goodbye parties, no extended family dinners. We drove west until the air felt different. Lake Tahoe greeted us with silence and snow. The kind that softens everything, even memory. We rented a cabin tucked between pines, far from the noise of the life I used to know. The first night Eric cooked. He always cooked when I couldn't think. I watched him move through the tiny kitchen barefoot on the wood floor, sleeves rolled up, humming off-key to some old Nina Simone record we'd found in a box of his. After dinner, we sat by the fireplace. I had my knees pulled to my chest, a blanket around my shoulders, and a mug of peppermint tea I'd been holding for an hour without drinking. He looked at me the way he always had. The way that asked without pressing. But tonight he finally spoke. What now? I looked into the fire. I thought I'd feel emptier after all this. But I didn't. I felt clean. Like I'd finally stopped carrying furniture that didn't belong in my house. I want to build something, quietly. No legacy to prove. Just something useful. He nodded. His voice softened. Something for you. Yes, and for people like us. Independent hotels. Boutique retreats. Places run by people who remember your name when you check in. We could consult, help them craft identity, experience, story. His eyes lit up the way they did when he was sketching, even though he hadn't picked up a pencil in months. I've always liked the way you think. But there's one thing missing. What? He smiled. A name. I leaned back, considered the question. It had been sitting with me for days, actually. I don't want my last name on the door. Not anymore. Not Whitman. He laughed softly. Not Whitman. That's actually kind of perfect. We both paused. It wasn't a placeholder, it was an answer. We wrote it down on a napkin. Just the words. Not Whitman. The next day I opened a fresh notebook. No logo. No fancy cover. Just white pages. Blank. Waiting. I scribbled the first ideas for the brand, who we'd serve, what we'd offer, what we'd never do. No family discounts, no nepotism. No boardroom built on guilt and shame. By sunset, we had a pitch deck forming and a name reserved. That night, as I fell asleep with the scent of pine in my hair and the hum of quiet wrapped around me, I realized something. I hadn't lost a family. I had shed one. Like a skin that no longer fit. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove I belonged at someone else's table. I was building my own. The email came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a utilities bill and an ad for discounted bridesmaid dresses I hadn't ordered. It was from Tessa. The subject line read simply coffee. I stared at it for a long time, half expecting it to vanish. After everything, after the silence, the lawsuits, the tabloid headlines, the radio silence from her end, while our mothers scrambled for control, now she wanted to meet. I didn't answer right away. I let the day move around me. I folded laundry. I scheduled a home inspection. I tested the lighting for my home office. I made dinner. I slept. The next morning I said yes. We met at a small cafe near the water, the kind with creaky wood floors and mismatched chairs. It was the kind of place we used to walk by as kids and giggle about how it looked haunted. Now it just looked quiet. She was already there when I arrived. Sitting at the corner table, sunglasses perched on her head, full makeup, like she was trying to look unfazed. But her fingers were curled tight around the ceramic coffee cup, and her leg bounced under the table. I walked up and sat across from her without a word. The silence settled for a moment before she broke it. You won. I blinked. That's what she came here to say. I'm not playing to win, I said. She gave a half laugh, brittle and sharp. You always were good at taking the moral high ground. I watched her waiting. Dad says he'll cut me off if you don't agree to a family settlement. He says you've made this impossible for all of us. So this wasn't an apology, it was damage control. I leaned back, letting her words roll off me. I paid for my own wedding, I said. I bought my house. I hired my own attorney. You think I need anything from him? From you? She flinched just a flicker, but enough. He's going to stop paying my apartment lease, she said quietly. You're 35, Tessa. That stung. She looked down at her cup, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small next to her. I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter or the understudy to her spotlight. I felt free. You know, she said, I didn't think you'd really go through with it. The clause, the shares, the press leak. I thought you'd back down like always. I nodded slowly. That's the difference now. We sat in silence for another moment. Outside the window, the wind played with the leaves. A woman walked past, pushing a stroller, humming softly. Somewhere behind the counter, a milk steamer hissed. You could still say no, she said. You could still call off the legal stuff. Let Dad keep his seat. Let us fix this. There's no fixing something that was never built right to begin with, I said. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but closed it again. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I stood smoothing the fabric of my coat. Claire, wait. Her voice cracked a little on my name. I turned slightly, not enough to face her, but enough to hear her if she said something important. She started, then stopped. I waited. But she didn't continue, so I walked out. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. And for the first time in my life, I didn't leave feeling like I'd lost something. I felt like I'd taken something back. Outside, the wind was crisp, the sun low in the sky. The streets glowed that golden color that only came at the end of October. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and headed toward the ferry dock. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the deck of my townhouse. My phone buzzed once. A message from Ethan. How did it go? I texted back one word. Closure. He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. The silence said enough. Inside, the house smelled like fresh paint and lemon oil. A small bouquet sat on the counter, a housewarming gift from the bakery across the street. I'd spent the weekend hanging art, unpacking the last of my books, setting up a proper desk. I'd always thought home was something you were given. Now I knew it was something you built. The next morning, I woke up to another email. This one from our mother. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I walked to the kitchen, brewed my coffee, and started my day. They'd had their chance, and they'd all watched me walk away. It was the scent of lilacs that hit me first. Late spring in Vermont always smelled like renewal, but this time it meant something else. I stepped onto the grounds of the inn Claire and Eric had chosen. No marble arches, no paparazzi. Just old pine trees, soft grass, and a white barn wrapped in twinkle lights. The vow renewal wasn't some grand production. There were no flower walls or drones overhead. Just 28 people. Every single one of them handpicked. People who had stayed, people who had seen. I found my seat at the back, a folding wooden chair with a sprig of lavender tied to it. Claire glanced over and smiled. This wasn't the same Claire I had grown up with. This Claire stood taller, laughed softer, and chose her words the way an artist chose brushstrokes. Next to her, Eric looked exactly how I remembered him, except this time his gaze didn't flick around the room looking for an escape hatch. His eyes stayed locked on Claire, steady, certain. As the officiant began speaking, the wind picked up, gently rustling the rows of white chairs and swaying the field grasses. No music. Just birdsong and breath. It felt more like a promise than a performance. When it was time for them to read their vows, Eric reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a handwritten note. He paused for a moment, looked around the room, and then began. He talked about loss. About the time they almost didn't make it. About the power of second chances and what it means to choose someone again even when it's not easy. Claire's voice was steady when it was her turn. She didn't talk about weddings or dresses or the disaster that was her first walk down the aisle. She talked about visibility. About what it means to feel like you're in the room but never truly seen. And how Eric had changed that. There was no champagne toast, no influencer hashtags or velvet ropes. Instead, they passed around mugs of spiced cider and slices of peach tart that someone's grandmother had baked. I took a sip and looked around. A few feet away, Samantha stood near the wooden fence holding a camera but not working. She was a guest. A friend now. After the wedding, she'd written a piece. Not about the scandal. Not about the arrest. But about silence. About daughters who vanish without leaving and families who only notice when it's too late. It had gone viral. Not for the gossip but for the truth. Claire had invited her personally. I didn't see Aunt Margot. She hadn't RSVP'd, no one mentioned her, and I didn't ask. Some people don't get a second invitation. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the crowd drifted toward the barn, where long tables waited with candles, mismatched china, and the kind of comfort food that filled you in more ways than one. I lingered by the fence a moment longer. Amanda appeared beside me quietly. She wore flats and a cardigan, her hair swept into a bun. No makeup. Just Amanda. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, hands tucked into her sleeves. After a while, she turned to me. "You look good," she said. "You too," I replied. A pause. She added, "I'm moving to Oregon next month. Going back to school, counseling program." That surprised me. "I figured it was time," she said. "After everything. I want to do something that makes me better. Not louder. Not flashier. Just better." I nodded. We stood there for a few more minutes before she gently patted my arm and headed inside. At the barn, I found my name written in watercolor on a place card. It sat next to Samantha's and across from a nurse named Jeremy, who once treated Claire during her recovery. None of the guests asked about the past. No one tiptoed around names. This wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning. As the evening stretched on, someone brought out an old record player. Claire and Eric danced to a scratchy Frank Sinatra song under the strings of white lights, not choreographed. Just swaying forehead to forehead like no one else was watching. I looked around at the faces. Some were new. Some I'd met once years ago but barely remembered. Yet they were all here. Not because of blood, not because of obligation. Because they'd chosen each other. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was in the right place. Not on the sidelines, not waiting to be handed a script or a role in someone else's scene. Just present. Whole, unhidden. Claire raised a glass near the end of the night. No microphone, no speech, just a quiet toast. "To seeing," she said simply. "And being seen." A few clinked glasses. Others just smiled. On the drive back to the cottage I'd rented nearby, I kept the windows down. The breeze smelled of lilacs again. I thought about what it meant to rebuild not just a life but a family. Mine didn't begin in Ridgefield, not really, and it didn't end at that wedding no matter how final it had once felt. It began here. On folding chairs and under barn rafters with cider and silence and the kind of healing that didn't need permission. Family isn't where you're born, it's where you're recognized. It's where the chairs are set for you on purpose. Where your name is written not just on place cards but in the memory of people who refuse to let you fade. It's where you're seen.